Hello viewers, December 3rd, 2024, Tuesday, and we are going to discuss once again the major political events, the major military conflicts all over the world. But most importantly, we're going to discuss in the first half the history of the Ukraine conflict, which I think is about to end in probably the next 3 or 6 months. At least the hostilities are going to end. And then we are going to discuss the major conflict which is now flaring up in Syria, in Idlib province and in close to Aleppo. But first, let me discuss a little bit about the history of the Ukrainian conflict and what a disaster it has been, which Joe Biden and its administration has led us to in the last 8 to 9 years or so. You see, the one bloc, the Western bloc, which is led by the US, is a mortal enemy of the Russian interest or the Russian state. Why? The important question is why. The answer to this question is Russia perhaps is the one of the two major powers, including China, which has the military might, which has the economic might, and which has the natural resources, the land resources, that it can stand up to any country in the world. And they cannot be dictated as the US and the West wants it to be dictated to pursue their own interest. That is the reason why, because of its extensive landmass, because of the extensive resources that the God has given to Russia, endowed to Russia, the US has a vested interest to basically parse Russia into parts, to destroy Russia, to regime change the Putin government, which has basically risen the prestige of Russia after the humiliating years of Boris Yeltsin in the post-Soviet era. So that is the reason why we are seeing this conflict. In 2004, there was a first Orange Revolution in Ukraine, where the neutral government was dislodged by the CIA-backed coup. Then in 2014, we saw the Maidan coup, in which State Department was directly involved in overthrowing another reasonable neutral government led by Viktor Yanukovych, and installed the pro-Nazi, neo-Nazi Bandera supporting government in Kiev, and that led to the civil war in eastern Ukraine, where the Russian speakers were targeted by these neo-Nazi banderas, and that caused the interference of the Russian state. What we are seeing right now, this conflict has a history of at least 30 years in the making. The push of the West to include Ukraine, to include other Eastern European orbit states into Ukraine, and thrusting them on the face of Russia, which Russia had said categorically, Putin had said categorically in the 2008 Munich summit, that Ukraine and Georgia cannot be the part of Ukraine, because that would be an existential security crisis for Russia. And thus, in 2022, even after repeated warnings, Ukraine was funded, was funneled money, was financed resources, provided weapons, all sorts of weapons, just short of nuclear weapons. And that led to this conflict in Ukraine. But after 2.5 years, where Russia has now prevailed in eastern half of Ukraine, United States is basically just like a kind of a bad drunkard who kind of increases its risk, is now shelving, is now giving ATACMS missiles, Storm Shadow Scalp missiles, which can attack Russian heartlands deep into Moscow. That could be a potential escalation that could lead to a Ukraine nuclear conflict. I am not exaggerating this fact, because that is stated by Vladimir Putin himself, that increased interference, especially the missile attacks deep inside Russia, could be reciprocated not only through missiles inside Ukraine or in the eastern orbit, where NATO members are, NATO stations are, NATO offices and NATO stations are placed, but it can also lead to attack on Western European countries who are directly involved, a veiled reference to France and UK, and also to the US landmass, because they are also directly involved in this conflict. So that is the first thing I wanted to cover about it. This conflict, because the West is being defeated, because the Russia has prevailed and because the US nose is bloodied, US will raise its stakes, at least this Biden administration, because there is an egg on their faces now. They could potentially lead to escalation that could end up being a bigger disaster than it is currently is right now. That is the first thing I wanted to cover. The second thing I want to cover is about this new conflict, which is, it's not a new conflict, it's actually an old conflict, but it's now flared up again in Syria. And here the same story. The Western-backed terrorist groups, and I'm not exaggerating, there is a report in Kiev Post right now. Ukraine basically is directly involved, Ukrainian intelligence agency is directly involved, and NATO ally, Turkey, second biggest military in NATO, is directly involved in supporting these rebel groups. There are previous reports that various Gulf countries are directly involved, funneling these Sunni jihadist movements into Syria to destroy Assad's regime. Assad, being a long-term ally of the Russian Empire or the Russian state, had previous links with Soviet Union, had basically called for help of the Russian military in 2014, where these same rebel groups were about to overthrow Assad's regime in Damascus. Thanks to Iran, thanks to Lebanese resistance, and thanks mostly important to the Russian Air Force, the air cover that was provided by Putin, these militants were thrown into or confined into mostly into border regions of Turkey and Iraq, in Idlib province and close to Turkish border. But right now we are seeing that these same militant groups, these are terrorist groups. This HTS, Hayatul Tahrir al-Sham, is basically a foreign terrorist organization, branded as such accepted as such by the State Department of the US as a terrorist organization, is being directly linked to Turkey and has direct links to Ukraine. And you know where the Ukrainian money is coming from. Ukraine is just a shell of the US funneled money. Ukraine, which cannot even provide decent electricity to its own people, how come they provide intelligence support, training, material support to all these Islamic militants? What is their connection? What is their interest? Just ask yourself. Their interest is to basically reduce Russian influence in the Middle East and to basically increase the Western-backed interests. That is the current paradigm which is at play here. The US wants to create pressure fronts in all parts of the region where there is Russian influence. You can see this in Ukraine, you can see this in Georgia, where the opposition is openly saying that we do not accept the election results. We are seeing the same thing in Syria right now. We are seeing same things in other parts of the country, other parts of the globe, where Russian influence are being, trusted. These two power group interests are in conflict zone. We are seeing this in the Sahel region, in Africa. We have seen this with conflicts of the Ukrainian intelligence services and the Wagner group in Mali, where Wagner group is supporting the Mali's government in Africa, and the Ukrainian intelligence agencies and other Western powers are involved in overthrowing Mali's government. So you can see, if you look at through a geopolitical lens, you can easily understand what is currently at play here. The West wants to basically reduce the influence, Russian influence, Chinese influence, so that they can basically recapture the liberal order, the so-called euphemistically spoken international rules-based order is currently at stake. And that is what is happening right now in Syria. Thank you so much.